We always hear about a mother's love, right? It's supposed to be this fierce protective shield, a mom who would move mountains just to keep her kids safe. It's true unconditional love, right? At least that's how I personally feel as a mom, and I know many other mothers who would feel the exact same way. But what happens when that protective instinct completely gets twisted? What if the mother, the person who holds the ultimate trust, goes down a path of grief, isolation, and eventually calculated cruelty? This is a story that begins with a perfect, settled family life in New Zealand, but ends with a devastating tragedy so meticulously buried that it took 4 long years for the truth to even begin to surface. And here's the most sickening part of it all. The person responsible for this horrific act didn't stick around to face the music. Instead, they completely erased their identity, they changed their name, and hopped on a flight to start a brand new life on the other side of the world, leaving absolutely nothing behind. Hi everyone, welcome back, and to anyone new watching, hello, welcome. My name is Zara, and on this channel we dive deep into true crime cases. So if that sounds like your kind of thing, please join the fam, hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and share it around if you can. I really appreciate every single one of you that takes the time to do that. It means so much to me. And if you want to get to know each other a little bit more, consider becoming a channel member. You get instant access to our private Discord server, and we can chat one-on-one about anything and everything. You can give me case suggestions, you can give me your thoughts and opinions, and we can just hang and chat about life too. So you can hit the join button below this video to get in. Okay, now let's jump into this case. Ji-Yeon Lee Smith was born in South Korea and moved to New Zealand with her family in 1993 when she was 13 years old. However, a few years later, her father sadly died in 1998, and Lee was only 18 at the time, but the loss of her father hit her really hard, and the grief made her return to Korea, where she studied for 2 more years at university. Her mother, Chun-Ja Lee, stayed back in New Zealand, but eventually Lee came back to New Zealand to study hospitality. She settled back into the local community, specifically within a Korean church where she worked as a Sunday school teacher. And it was there that she met a man named Ian Jo in 2004. They dated for a couple years, and by 2006, they were married. And by all accounts, they had a very happy and loving life together. They were truly in love. They first lived in an apartment, and then they moved into a house in West Auckland and finally settled in Papatoetoe. In September 2009, they welcomed their first child, a daughter named Yuna Jo, and in March 2012, their son Minu Jo was born. Minu was born with a cleft palate, which caused him to have a speech impediment, but it didn't impact him much further than that. Ian was the family's sole financial provider, working as a supervisor at Auckland Airport, while Lee chose to be a full-time mom and look after their kids. Teachers at Papatoetoe South School described Ian and Lee as caring parents and said the children were super well behaved and respectful, and this was a picture of a stable, settled immigrant family in New Zealand. But stability is often very fragile, and in March 2017, Ian was diagnosed with a form of terminal cancer. This diagnosis, as you can imagine, just shattered everything. Their whole future together. I mean, they had little kids. It was devastating news for the couple. Lee was said to have just had effectively a breakdown following the news, completely unable to cope with the stress of Ian's illness and the subsequent treatment for him. Lee chose to hide her husband's illness from their kids, often asking her mother Chun to stay at home with their kids while Ian was in hospital. Lee would wake up super early in the morning to leave for the hospital, be with Ian all day, and then come home late at night after the kids were already ready to sleep. Lee told her mother several times that she could not live without Ian, saying that if he died, she would die too. She said her daughter wasn't eating and had no will to live. Chun told her, if you really want to follow your husband, go by yourself and I'll take the kids. Lee told her mom, you don't even know English. How can I let you look after the kids? And then they kind of just laughed it off. And that was the end of that. Chun thought it was just a passing comment, and it was fueled by this terrible situation they were in. She told her daughter not to have such weak thoughts. Ian actually traveled back to Korea for treatment, but it was unsuccessful, and he ended up in hospice care back home in New Zealand. I mean, Guys, this is devastating news to know that the love of your life is dying when you have two small children. It's honestly horrible. By August 2017, Lee was already struggling so badly that she went to a doctor for severe sleeping difficulties and was prescribed 60 tablets of a drug called nortriptyline, which is a common antidepressant. That prescription, meant to help her sleep, would soon become the mechanism for her destruction. Lee would not let the kids see their father in hospital and had to be convinced by Ian's brother, Jimmy, to see him during hospice care. She just didn't want the kids to know that their father was dying, which is understandable, but it's kind of like you're taking that away from them. You're taking away their choice to actually spend their last moments with their father. Yuna was 8 years old at the time and she didn't really ask any questions about her father, but Minu, who was only 6 years old, was really frightened by his father's sudden change in appearance and would ask questions. And I'm guessing Yuna didn't really ask questions because she kind of knew what was going on. Sadly, only in November 2017, just a few months after his diagnosis, Ian died and Lee's world completely collapsed. Grief turned into intense isolation. She struggled desperately to tell her kids that their father was gone. On the day of Ian's funeral, Lee asked her mother Chun to stay at home with the kids while she attended the funeral. The kids also continued going to school, which some of the teachers found really odd. Teachers even offered to help Lee break the news to their kids, that their father died, but Lee told them that she wanted to take them on a holiday to the Gold Coast in Australia before telling them. She then told the school that the kids would not be returning to school for the rest of the school year. In the months that followed, Lee completely withdrew from the supportive community that she once cherished. She declined assistance from her brother-in-law Jimmy and his family. She cut off contact with the children's school, and the children actually never even returned to school, even in the new year in 2018. So this total social isolation is a major red flag, a terrifying sign as to what was coming next. The isolation compounded her severe depression, leading to suicidal thoughts. She started telling her own mother that she wanted herself and her children to die with her late husband. It seemed Lee's identity and sense of happiness were entirely intertwined with her life as Ian's wife. So now, with him gone, her stability, her anchor, her financial source just vanished. The children, Yuna and Minu, weren't just her beloved kids anymore. She could not actually bear to have the children around her as a constant reminder of her once happy life, which had been cruelly, taken from her. In her profound self-destructive grief, she was moving towards a desire to eradicate all remaining fragments of that existence, of that once happy life. What followed Ian's death was a period of bizarre, manic behavior that completely contradicted the image of this isolated, sad mother. Instead of facing her new life, Lee used Ian's life insurance money to embark on this wildly expensive final escape fantasy. A forensic accountant later told the court that her spending skyrocketed as compared to her usual spending. Starting in December of 2017, she took the children on a series of luxury trips, spending a staggering $32,000 on luxury and high-end hotels. This itinerary was frantic and unsustainable. In December of 2017, they went on a 2-month holiday to South Korea. By April 2018, she was staying at a Hilton hotel in Topol. In May 2018, they traveled to the Gold Coast in Australia. And in mid-June 2018, they were visiting Queenstown in the South Island, again staying at a Hilton hotel. This fast, high-cost travel suggests a really desperate attempt at a distraction, running away from the reality that was awaiting them back home in Auckland, being in that house that her husband once lived in. It must have been, she probably couldn't deal with it. The children were last seen by relatives on April 26, 2018. Ian's brother Jimmy and his wife visited and took a photo of them at their house. They said Lee was wearing makeup, the house was tidy, and everything just seemed normal. And I think the reason why, they're mentioning that she was wearing makeup and the house was tidy, because that would suggest kind of a normalcy for her. Like if the house was completely, a pigsty and she looked, not like herself, maybe they would have thought, okay, something's up with her. But in their eyes, everything was okay. However, the last concrete sighting of Yuna and Minu came on June 27th, 2018, when they logged into the game Minecraft and each gained trophies. That simple digital timestamp was very important. In July 2018, Lee officially changed her name from Ji Yun Lee to Hak Young Lee. She wanted a change, a new life. She told some people she put the kids into an institution, and she then used more of the remaining money to take a business class flight to South Korea, and she was seeking beauty treatments there to fully prepare for her intended new life. These are all just strong indicators that she was not functioning correctly. She was in this complete confused fog of madness, but she was actively trying to erase her former self and her life. In December 2018, months after Lee, now Hak-young, fled New Zealand, her mother Chun went to the Auckland Central Police Station to file a missing persons report stating that she hadn't heard from her daughter in a year, basically since Ian's death. A friend from Australia had been messaging Hak-young through 2018 saying she missed Lee, did she change her name, and that she should just keep in touch with her. But by the end of 2018, when she didn't hear back, she told her that she was now very worried. But in Korea, Hak-young was attempting to rebuild her life. Court records show that she was diagnosed with depression and prescribed medication at a clinic sometime between 2018 and 2021. And by 2021, she was even dating a man she met on an app. However, there are reports that that relationship was very abusive. The first crucial, crack in her secrecy emerged in mid-June 2022. Hak-young's mom, Chun, found out from her pastor that Hak-young was actually a patient in a psychiatric ward at a South Korean hospital. The pastor was concerned because he had heard about her earlier suicidal comments where she said she wanted to kill herself and kill her children. When Chun was able to speak to Hak-young directly on the phone and asked about her children, she gave a really terrifying response saying, "Mom, I don't have any kids," which Chun took as a serious indication of mental distress, and she was still hopeful, thought perhaps her, grandchildren were with Ian's in-laws. But by August 11th, 2022, the full horrific truth was revealed in Clendon Park. A man named Hongi Wihongi won an auction of mixed items. Most were just household items, and they were left abandoned in a storage shed in Clendon Park. He paid $401 for the items and planned to sell each item and make some more money. But first, he had to go through the items to see what he had won. So there was a washing machine, beds, a kitchen table, a microwave, a bag of clothes with 2 suitcases wrapped in black plastic. Hongi cut through the black plastic, and inside the suitcase, he found more layers of black plastic. And then suddenly, the smell of dead rats hit him. Dreading what was next, Hongi soon found the body of a small boy lying on his side. The boy was dressed in brown pants, a green long-sleeve t-shirt, and a puffer jacket. He quickly called the police. When they arrived, a pathologist together with detectives would open the second suitcase, and inside they found the body of a young girl. She was dressed in a long-sleeve t-shirt bearing the words "Little Princess," pants, and a pink hooded jacket with a rim of fur. Police quickly identified the victims as Minu Jo and Yuna Jo, confirming they had been dead for approximately 4 years. The DNA and forensic evidence pointed towards the identity of the children, and then the most important clue came by tracing the unit's rental contract to Hak-young Lee. Once Hak-young Lee was identified, the New Zealand police confirmed on August 22nd, 2022, that they knew she had fled to South Korea back in 2018. An international manhunt commenced, and Interpol quickly located Hak-young in the port city of Ulsan. On September 15, 2022, Hak-young was arrested on suspicion of crimes against humanity. Hak-young's new life was put on pause, but realistically, she had just been living in her own world and essentially went through 4 years of evasion, but it hadn't been a peaceful life. The fact that she was eventually discovered in a psych ward in Korea shows that the psychological damage that led to the crime never went away. The running away was simply a continuation of her profound mental deterioration. Hak-young consented to extradition, and South Korean authorities returned her to New Zealand in November of 2022 to face 2 murder charges. While she was actually on the flight over, she told a detective that she volunteered to come back and that she wanted to hold a funeral for her kids because she initially left them at an institution. So before we move on to the trial, let's quickly talk about what happened to those poor, sweet kids, which is hard to even really talk about because this family already went through a lot with the loss of their father, and now we have to talk about what happened to them just 6 months after his death, and it's honestly horrific. It's believed that it was sometime in late June 2019 that Hak-young carried out the murders. The children had last logged onto their Minecraft accounts on June 27th, 2018, and we know it was the children on the accounts. Their usernames were Hiro Minu and Princess Yuna 35, because at the same time the kids were logged on between 10:53 a.m. and 12:07 p.m., Hakyung was out of the house posting her application to change her name from Jiyeon Lee to Hakyung Lee. Once Hakyung was later interviewed by a psychiatrist, she told them that she wanted the kids to be with their father. So it's believed that later that night on June 27th, she poured each of them a glass of juice. She then took the pills that her doctor prescribed her, crushed them up, and dissolved them in the kids' juice. The drug was the prescription antidepressant nortriptyline. Hakyung later claimed the children simply did not wake up from their sleep. But something about the fact that she used this drug suggests some level of planning, right? Hakyung got this antidepressant back in August 2017 for difficulty sleeping while her husband was in hospice care, yet she still had a lethal amount left with her for 10 months after. So she had 60 pills at the start. So either she got the meds refilled if there were repeats, or she kept the drugs, with her, which means she did this deliberately as a way to carry out her self-destructive intentions, which tragically extended to her kids. We can say that she was really mentally incapacitated at this point, a failed, double murder attempt. But what she did next and even prior, her actions were purely methodical and calculated. Earlier on June 27th, when she was out posting her application for her name change, that's obviously red flag number one. But after this, she goes to Mitre 10 to buy garbage trash bags, black bin liners, bubble wrap, and duct tape. After the children were dead, Hakyung meticulously wrapped the bodies of her son and her daughter in those black trash bags and placed them inside 2 peach-colored suitcases. The next day, she drove to a safe store facility, renting, the storage unit, and then had her photo taken. Hakyung later told police that she tried to end her life twice on June 27th and June 28th by taking those same pills, but this didn't really make sense because, again, her actions following their deaths just didn't line up. At 12:13 p.m. on June 28th, she was submitting an application for a full driver's test. Then on June 29th, she sat and passed her full driver's license test and put gas in her car and then purchased a lotto triple dip ticket. And then she traveled to Albany in North Auckland, where she spent $900 on eyebrow and hair treatments. Then she went back to Mitre 10, bought more trash bags and a steel padlock. Later that afternoon, she made a number of trips to her storage unit, and it was during one of those visits that she left the bodies of her children in the suitcases at the storage unit and then put the steel padlock on the doors. Over the next few weeks, Hakyung packed up the family home. She ended her lease agreement and applied for an urgent passport in her new name and paid for movers to pack up a house that was once their happy family home. On July 29th, 2018, Hakyung took that business class flight out of New Zealand to start a new life with no children. For 4 years, the suitcases sat silently in that storage unit in Auckland, and Hakyung lived freely in South Korea, having completely cut off her old life. But the extended family in New Zealand knew something was terribly wrong the entire time. I mean, if you normally hear from children in your family or even see updates about them or even just give them a call and then all of a sudden that vanishes, it's clear that something is sick. The New Zealand suitcase murders trial began at the Auckland High Court on September 8th, 2025, after several delays, and Hakyung Lee, who represented herself with the support of 2 lawyers, pleaded not guilty to the 2 murder charges. The entire battle in the courtroom revolved around the question of her mental state at the time of the killings. The defense lawyers stated that Hakyung was responsible for giving the antidepressant to the children, but they argued that she should be found not guilty by reason of insanity. They claimed the murders were the culmination of a descent into madness that began immediately after Ian Jo's death, arguing that Hakyung was fragile and had essentially just lost control of her mind. Her lawyer, Lorraine Smith, said, "She's not a liar. She's mentally unwell. She barely has the will to lift her head. This is not an act to make you feel sorry for her." Hakyung believed it was the best interest of the kids to die rather than face an unhappy and parentless life. She was seen by 2 psychiatrists in the lead up to the trial, and Dr. Yvette Kelly stated that she was the first person to find out how Hakyung had actually killed her kids and that it was like getting blood from a stone. But she stated that Hak-young did not know that killing her children was morally wrong because she had delusional beliefs at the time. But after Dr. Kelly was cross-examined on the stand, she said, okay, well, I still believe she was depressed, but I accept that she knew that killing her kids was morally wrong. It was so weird. Like, Dr. Kelly was actually very happy on the stand. She was like laughing, which was very unusual for a person testifying in a child murder trial. The second psychiatrist, Dr. Eric Monasterio, stated a completely different opinion. He said he did believe Hak-young was suffering from a moderate to severe major depressive disorder, but there was no evidence that she was impaired by psychosis or other impairment at the time she killed her kids. However, the prosecution led by state prosecutor Natalie Walker dismantled the insanity argument by focusing squarely on Hak-young's actions after the deaths. They emphasized that in New Zealand, the bar for a successful insanity defense is extremely high. The defendant must prove that they were incapable of understanding that what they were doing at the time was wrong or that the act was morally wrong. And the forensic evidence, however, presented to be very difficult for the prosecution because the bodies were in such an advanced state of decomposition. I mean, they had been in those suitcases for over 4 years. Pathologist Simon Stables told the court that it was really difficult to conclude that nortriptyline was the only cause of death. It could have been the cause, or it could have simply put the kids to sleep and then something else could have taken place. And this is why Hak-young's own admission that she gave the kids the drugs was so important. It proved she committed the act of actually poisoning those kids. The Crown argued that her behavior showed calculation, not complete derangement. They pointed to the careful concealment of the bodies in the suitcases, the immediate renting of that storage unit, the change of her identity from Ji-yoon Lee to Hak-young Lee, securing that business class ticket and the successful flight to South Korea, where she, managed to take care of herself for years. They argued that her crime was a selfish and deliberate attempt to escape the burden of parenting after her happy life had been cruelly taken away from her when her husband died. Justice Jeffrey Venning, who presided over the trial, stated that while Lee was undoubtedly suffering from severe depression, her actions strongly suggested that she planned the killings in this deliberate and calculated way before taking the active steps to cover them up. In the court documents, the judge stated that he disagreed that Hak-young could have possibly been acting on autopilot, robotically going through a checklist after the murder, buying the trash bags, hiring the storage unit, getting the padlock, etc. He stated that her actions were totally organized and took place over a number of days. Like, nobody could be in such a robotic, not that it's impossible, but it was unlikely for someone to be in this robotic, autopilot for such a long period. The jury agreed with the prosecution. Following the closing arguments, the jury began deliberating, and after only 3.5 hours, on September 23rd, 2025, they returned a guilty verdict on both counts of murder. They rejected any insanity defense. Hak-young returned to the High Court for sentencing on November 26, 2025, 2 weeks ago, and Justice Venning handed down the mandatory sentence for murder in New Zealand, life imprisonment. He set a minimum non-parole period of just 17 years. However, the judge did acknowledge that she was severely unwell, and he ordered that she would begin her sentence immediately as a patient in a locked psychiatric facility under New Zealand's compulsory mental health treatment law. So she would only return to prison to complete the rest of her sentence once she was deemed psychologically stable and well enough. The sentencing structure acknowledges that Hak-young was both criminally responsible and very sick, seeking to ensure that she actually receives necessary medical help before facing, the traditional incarceration. The end of the trial in 2025 did not bring an end to the devastation this crime caused. This case left deep, irreversible scars across her entire family and her community and her husband's family. Yuna and Mina Jo would have been 16 and 13 years old today. Hak-young's mother, Chun, expressed pain that was described as feeling like a pain that cut through my bones. She said her daughter completely changed after her husband's death and was initially a really great, loving mother, but after his death, she was full of woe, she was irritable and fatigued. Her daughter became a completely different person. She stated in court, if she wanted to die, why didn't she die alone? Why did she take the innocent children with her? It's devastating, but it's a real question that most would ask because no amount of despair or mental illness justifies the calculated decision to kill these two innocent, trusting children in an act of supposed suicide. It's horrific. Ian's brother Jimmy stated that their family was facing devastating ongoing trauma. He felt like he had failed to look after his niece and nephew. Even a couple years after the case, he hasn't been able to tell his own mother, who was battling cancer in Korea, about the deaths of her grandchildren, fearing that the news was going to actually kill her. He even had to keep the secret from his own kids, Minu and Yuna's cousins, showing how this crime forced surviving family members into this life of painful silence and secrecy. This case is a sad and scary example of how unchecked depression, fueled by the shock of losing a loved one and total social isolation, can cause such destruction. Hakyung's actions were a final, terrible severing of all ties to a life that had become too painful for her to bear and continue with. The fact that Yuna and Minu Jo's final resting place remained hidden in these 2 peach-colored suitcases for 4 years, only to be accidentally revealed by a twist of financial misfortune, makes this one of the most uniquely horrific tragedies in New Zealand's criminal history. Like I said at the start, you can't imagine that a mother would do this to her own children. We have heard of many similar cases, but it seems that their mental state always plays a part. And I know that may seem obvious, like duh, but I'm saying that to show how it's not always mostly fueled by anger or impulse. It's usually this slow burn of mental issues plaguing the mind, eroding their thoughts, causing them to commit something that they naturally, biologically would never dream of doing. Of course, there are people out there who are evil, who want to harm others, including children. But as a mother, when you create that child, when you grow that life inside of you, you give birth, you raise that child, that is truly something you would never even consider was a possibility, especially at the hands of you. I can't even put a thought together of how she placed her child in a suitcase, zipped them up, and then left them all alone in an unknown place. And she did it twice to 2 kids. I believe that Hakyung was mentally ill, but she knew what she did to those kids was horrific, and that's why she continued to suffer after. Her life, wasn't magically all better now. Those poor, poor babies, and it's just a horrific, sad case all around, from Ian's death and diagnosis to how those kids must have lived after with their mom in clearly like a mental episode. The denial that their mother was in, the extravagant holidays don't conceal the fact that their mother was probably spiraling in front of those kids. Minu might have been too young, but was most likely aware of the state her family was in. Don't underestimate kids, man. They are fully aware of situations, and that makes it even all the more heartbreaking. Let me know your thoughts down below, guys. I know it's a really sad one, so I look forward to reading all your comments. Thanks so much for watching. If you haven't subscribed, go ahead, subscribe and like, and I'll see you next time. Besitos. That's my daughter. Bye.